Okay, thanks everybody for coming out. I'm super stoked about this talk. My name is Wes Bos. I'm a Canadian, however, I have 100% Dutch blood. So if you want to come up after and teach me some sort of Dutch word, I would actually really like that. I make web dev courses. I have a highly awarded podcast called Syntax, which I'm pretty stoked about. And this talk today is about coding with AI, as well as actually building stuff with these AI models. And I want to start off with a few things, because I know there's a couple of you in the room are going to like, oh, this jerk off that's talking about AI right now, right? I have nothing here to sell you. I don't work for some AI company. I don't have any like crazy stuff. Well, if you're that stoked about it, I might try sell you something later. So don't get too excited. I'm not a huckster for trying to push it. You know, like I'm not a Web3 crypto guy that figured out it didn't work out, and you know, like I'm just stoked about a lot of this AI stuff that's going on, and I'm here just to tell you stuff that is cool. So AI, I think it gives us developers like a massive boost in productivity, code quality, as well as like the kind of stuff that we're able to build. Like we're still figuring a lot of this stuff out. This is just like 6 months, a year of things going crazy, but I don't think it's going anywhere. Like I always compare it to like the crypto stuff, and I was like, oh, I'll keep my eye on that and stuff like that. And that stuff was never really all that useful to me. But this stuff is just like, wow, I can't stop using this stuff in my day-to-day. So let's talk about some of the mediums that we use AI as web developers. So probably the biggest one. Who here is using GitHub Copilot or something like that, right? Yeah, probably about half the room here. And it's super handy. As you're writing code, it kind of just says, is this what you want? And you hit it. We also have CLI. Oh, shit, there's supposed to be a video there. Just imagine something like GitHub Copilot or Fig, where you have a CLI command, and it gives you access and shows you what all the CLI commands are. It's pretty handy. There's chat apps, which probably a lot of us have also interfaces with, where you just ask it, how do I do X, Y, and Z? There is pull request templates now, where it's just like you spend all this time working on your code, and then you have to create a pull request, and it's sometimes hard to figure out what all that good stuff is. And there's just like so many different experiments that we have. So there's voice, which GitHub Copilot voice, which is kind of cool. Like it's huge for accessibility, but it's also kind of interesting as like is your voice a new input? Like you get your mouse, you got your keyboard. Is your voice a new input? We don't know. We're experimenting with it. There's brushes where you can just click a button, make it accessible, document this, add types. Prompts as the new syntax. So there's a lot of like talk around like, do we write code anymore, or do we just write prompts, right? And like, obviously not yet, but there's people trying to explore. Maybe that is something, maybe it's not. Boilerplate generation for these things. Do you need boilerplate generators anymore, or can AI do that, where it's a little bit more well-suited? So look, why do you want to use these types of things? So first, it's faster than Google. It's context-aware, which is really the game changer, is it knows about the code that you're writing. It knows about the types of your project. It knows about like what tabs you have open at the time, and all of that context really helps when you're trying to find an answer. It solves your problem. It doesn't solve somebody else's problem, and you can say, oh, this dude on Stack Overflow solved the problem this way. How do I like apply that to what my problem is? It goes directly for your problem. So let's look at some examples. Dummy data. Generating dummy data is super handy. So this is, oh, shoot, what's going on with the... Hold on. This is not going to be good if this doesn't work. Let's see here. Sorry, folks. Where did my thing go? Uh-oh. Shoot. Sorry, folks. 1 sec. Let me figure this out. I gotta take my award down. Should we debug it live? Failed to fetch. Crap. Is it the Y? It's not. It's local, though. Let's try. Which one is that?
So JNS speakers, it's on the bottom near handle.
Can you just come up and show me? Oh, it's definitely the Wi-Fi. I'm seeing the first error is codehike.org is not getting the grammars. Sorry, I connected to my phone before this. Is this how much time I have left?
Sorry?
Is this how much time I have left?
Yeah.
Oh, they told me 20 minutes. We got extra time. This is awesome.
That's considered the QA time. I will give you 2 more minutes for the...
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. All right. So dummy data is give me an array of people, each person first and last. So basically, I'm just rambling what I want, much like a project manager, and out the other end, they give you types and actual data. And this is so handy especially for someone like me who creates a lot of examples and you want real data in there. A lot of people will use Faker.js. This is way better than Faker.js. In this case, take this code and add types. So you can often infer a lot of types, but AI can also generate them and stick them right into your code. Do the work. So you select a couple elements on the page and you say, write a function to paint the video frame to canvas as frequently as possible, give the entire output in TypeScript, and bam, out the other end you get that sort of boilerplate code. Make reusable. This is something I do a lot, is that I'm just like hacking on like a demo. You're making functions here or there, and okay, it's working. Now I need to like go back and clean it up. Like how many times you're like, okay, it works, but like I gotta clean it up yet, right? So you just say, make it into a reusable class, and it makes it into a beautiful reusable class and uses best practices and whatnot. Generate the CSS for you. So I have this HTML. This is a really handy use case for the new GitHub Copilot chat. You can say, select this HTML and say, given the selected HTML, write me a bunch of generated CSS selectors between X and Y and use this term. Write regexes. This one is so helpful. I hate writing regexes. So you just give it some examples of what you want it to do and you say, all right, here's a regex. And like, how do you know that that actually works? I don't know a whole lot about regex. Well, explain it, right? You come back to this regex in a couple months, you can ask it, okay, break it down, explain what each of these specific things do. Also, go ahead and write a few tests for the regexes that we have there, so you know that if you ever have to monkey with it, or you ever change what it is looking like, your tests are going to fail. By the way, I did run all of those tests, and it's obviously not a major example, but I ran it through a testing library, and it worked right away. Test-driven development is write a function that satisfies these tests. So I said, all right, I'm just going to imagine an API of take, I like oranges, and swap oranges with bananas, right? And at the other end, it's going to give you a function that returns an object, has an and swap method inside of it. Then, if it doesn't work right away, you can say, all right, well, thanks, AI, but I got this error. And you can kind of have this like recursive work with it where you say, okay, it didn't work. This is the error I got, and it'll run it again and give you some updated code. At a certain time, I was starting to run into circles with it where it's not perfect. I'm not going to stand up here and say, like, this is going to code everything for you. But it's certainly going to like save you 9 minutes, at least, on this type of stuff, you know? Flow control. Take this callback hell code and swap it out. And convert it to promises. So it just chained it to then. And I said, okay, well, convert that to async await. Boom, out the other way. And then at that time, I said, okay, but only get photos of weather is required to wait for get weather. The rest of them can be run concurrently, right? And at that point, it didn't know what to do. It just kept giving me the wrong answer over and over again. But that's not to write it off. That's to say, oh, well, that got me 73% of the way there. It's really good at complex input. So how many of you have ever had to use FFmpeg before? Yeah, it's awful, right? Like it's amazing, great tool, but there's a lot of like complex inputs with it. Like look at all these V's and A's and colons and things like that. And it's really good at taking English input or whatever language and converting it to the CLI alternative. Explain it to me. So if you don't know what those things are, again, it's going to break it down into the pieces and say, this piece means X, Y, and Z. I use this one quite a bit. This is really cool. So if you are looking at a demo of some code, you say, oh, I want to run that, but I don't have the dependencies installed. So instead of you copying, pasting every import or require, flipping over to your terminal, npm install, you just use the question mark is GitHub Copilot's CLI tool. So you just say install these, and then it will boom. It'll say, all right, I think you want to npm install the following things. Again, it's just like that's just a quick time saver that you can use rather than having to copy paste them all out. I could show you examples all day, but let's flip to the other side and look at how, oh, that's annoying. My cursor's on top of that. Does that bug anybody? You know what also bugs me is that this is not import. The require. We'll get that changed next year. So let's look at how you can integrate AI into your application. So I run a, all right, we can put it back up now. I run a highly awarded podcast called Syntax. Oh, is it the wrong way? Oh, shokey doodle. All right, and we're looking at like, okay, how can we use these tools to integrate into a better experience so that we can surface the content that is inside of the podcast a bunch of different ways to people maybe you don't want to listen to an entire podcast, or maybe you need to be able to find where in the podcast you talked about it. That's my Twitter DMs all day long. Wes, in what episode did you talk about X, Y, and Z? What was the thing that you used to delete your old NPM modules, right? So we use a service, so there's lots of different models out there that will transcribe it. And what we get is some JSON data for every single word, when it's been started, when it's been ended, who the speaker actually is, and all kinds of other really good data about it. So what we want from the AI is formatted as JSON. This is really cool. You can tell, sometimes it takes a little bit of coercing, but you can tell these AI models, ChatGPT and whatever, you can say, okay, I want this data, but give it to me formatted like X, Y, and Z. So you can say, give me the output formatted as JSON. And I've got it to a point where I can confidently JSON.parse the input from the AI. I've still rapid try catch around it just in case, but probably running it 300 times, it's never not given me straight up JSON. So we have the transcript. Then what we do is we say, summarize the podcast transcript into very succinct bullet points, each containing a few words. So the actual prompt to that is much longer. It takes a little bit of time. But basically you do. You give it the timestamp, you give it the speaker, and you give, like, they're called utterances, things that were said, right? However, there's a bit of a problem in that these models only are allowed to take a certain amount of input. It's called tokens, right? And a token is kind of like a word, but it's a little bit different, and periods and quotation marks also are tokens as well. So a 1-hour podcast is 15,000 tokens, and that's beyond the limit of most accessible AI. So GPT 3.5, that's 4,000 token limit. 4 is about 8,000 tokens. And then there's a couple, these last 3 are not accessible to most mortals right now. Anthropic is saying they're going to allow you to use 100,000 tokens, which is going to be wild, because you could literally send it your entire code base. Well, it depends on how big your code base is, but you can send it quite a bit of context for it to actually understand how it works. But here we are. Even if we've got the money for GPT-4, you only have 8,000 tokens, and that includes the reply that it's sending you. So in reality, you can really only send it 6,000. We have 15,000. So the answer to AI not being able to fit it is AI, which is kind of scary that the answer to a lot of AI problems is also AI. But the way that it works is you condense or you summarize what you have. So we take the input transcript, which is how it came out of my mouth, and we say, please condense this to be about 80% shorter or 50% shorter or whatever, but do not give up any details, right? Keep all of those details. And surprisingly, I have a lot of filler words that I say, and it can do a really good job at bringing it down to 50, 30% of the actual input without getting rid of it. I just kept reading through them. I'm like, yeah, it didn't really leave anything out. At that point, you have the transcript that's been condensed. Every utterance is smaller without leaving out any information. And then we write this massive prompt that says, summarize the provided transcript into succinct bullet points, blah, 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 blah. Additionally, please create the following for the episode, 1 to 2 sentence description, tweets, blah, 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 all kinds of information. Return each of them in JSON so that it looks like that. The key here is that if this one took me the longest time. Remember I said that JSON parse thing? Because it would always be like, OK, here's your result. And I'm like, no, don't say anything. Just give me the JSON, you know? And I don't want to regex it or whatever. So I finally landed on, if you, the AI, have feedback or clarifications, please put it in the notes. And I give him his own little spot. And sometimes it's like, sometimes it has stuff to tell me, but it puts it in the notes section, which is really nice of it. So once you have that massive prompt, you craft the request to your model. We're using OpenAI here, but I guarantee this is going to bounce around. And what we're using is going to change over the next couple months. So basically, you tell the system what it is. You say, the syntax is a podcast about web development. This is episode number 583. It is entitled whatever. Then you give it the entire prompt I just showed you in the last slide, and then finally that entire condensed prompt that we now have in a much shorter. So generally try to fit that into about 6,000 tokens, leaving yourself about 2,000 tokens for the response. Then, back from the result, it's pretty amazing what you get. So it says, this is the title. Can vanilla CSS replace Sass yet? A deep dive. Description. It does a really good description of what it is. Topics. So you ask it to say, all right, we'll group them into a bunch of topics. Then we get a detailed summary of every single topic or thing that we talk about through the entire episode. So it gives you timestamps of where it started, and as well as it kind of goes into it. And that one was a little bit tricky because sometimes it would glaze over like the personal stuff or the tangents that we would have went on. So you have to no, keep tangents in. But once we got it down, it did a really good job, and honestly quite better than a human could do at figuring out where are the major topics inside of this. This is entirely AI generated off of my voice. Tweets. What is that? All right, well, let's try to figure out what the tweets are. Sometimes we have people who want to tweet out about the podcast, but they don't necessarily know how to describe it or come up with something good. So it's actually pretty good that you can create 5 for us to tweet out as well as 5 for the actual listeners. Speaker time. So we could write a reduce to figure it out, but you can also just ask the AI, all right, well, you know about the entire transcript. You know where each utterance starts, so add them up. And if there's guests on there, it will try to, it's actually really good at figuring out guests' names based on, we're like, hey, today we have Josh on, and it will figure out what the person's name is. Websites reference. This is amazing, is that anytime we reference a website, not saying www.whatever, but anytime you just say, oh yeah, check out the docs or check out the site, it will pick up that we're talking about a specific website and go out and try to find the URLs. It's not perfect, but it's probably 93.8% perfect. Embeddings. This is a cool one because a lot of people just have experience with the chat and GitHub Copilot, and that's about it. So the third one is embeddings. This is not something that you're going to be using via those tools, at least not yet. So this is another tool that I came up with where it was kind of like a ask questions about syntax. Wes, what did you talk about? What was the tool that you used to get the rest of the Nutella out of the jar, right? There's all these weird things that we talk about on the podcast, and it's sometimes hard to figure out which of the 600 episodes was that on. So we would just ask it questions. In this case, I just said DIY tools, because I was trying to see if it could know the difference between like JavaScript tooling and like home tools. And it did a really good job at it. So I said, here's the highlights. And you tell it, please reference the show numbers where you actually found it. And it can do a really good summary of the topics that we have talked about. So the question is like, how does, 2 minutes, all right. How does it know about the 600+ hours of transcripts that we have? And the reality is it doesn't. We're not training some sort of special input model. What we do is we take every single utterance that we've said and we convert it into an embedding. So here's an example. I just said, I went on Twitter, I said, tell me what you did today. And people replied. And so 2 people said, lots of meetings and meetings. I took those 2 tweets, converted them into embeddings. That's what those numbers are. They're vectors. And you can figure out how similar are these 2 things. Same thing with this one. This is 82% similar. But if you look at the words, there's really only the word component and maybe menu that overlap. It's not text overlap. It's the AI understands what the person is talking about and then will generate an embedding based off of that. This one is unreal. I carved a spoon and I made a chicken coop, 80% similar. And you can also pass those tweets back to the chat and say, why are these things similar? And it says, both are satisfying DIY projects. So that's good for search. It's good for classification, tagging, grouping, anomaly, similar images. You can also embed images, video frames, things like that. So with syntax, we took every single utterance that we have, we converted it into an embedding vector, and the layout works a lot like this, where we take the question, we convert that to an embedding, so that's a bunch of numbers, and then we use a vector database to find utterances that are similar to what the person asked. Then I take that utterance and I say, give me the 2 sentences before that I talked about, and 2 sentences after that I talked about it. And then I say, OK, that's my context. Pass that back to the chat and say, given the following context, what is your answer to this question? And that's how a lot of these like custom chat models are actually being built. So the question here is like, are we screwed? That's every single person I've walked up to today. It says, oh, what's your talk on? AI, taking our job, right? You know? I don't know. I honestly don't know, and I don't think anybody actually does know, but I don't think so. AI gives us a massive boost in what we're able to do. And the question really is like, what are we able to now make that we have this? So like, I'm not a smart guy, and here I am on stage talking about cosine similarity. That's wild to me that I now have these new superpowers to be able to do that type of stuff. Technology is not going to stand still. It's going to be less about centering divs and more about pushing boundaries in the things that we are able to make. We're problem solvers. Our tools are always changing, and this is another instance of our tools changing. So I encourage you, don't ignore it, and stay sharp. Thank you.